Today, we're diving into the story of a man who really did the impossible, Tokugawa Ieyasu. This is the guy who unified Japan, ending a century of absolutely brutal civil war, and then set up a dynasty that would last for more than 250 years. So the big question is, how on earth did he pull it off?
And that's really the core of our story today. How do you actually end a century of nonstop war? I mean, this isn't just about winning a few battles. It's about fundamentally rewiring a whole society that has only ever known conflict. That was the mountain Ieyasu had to climb. And his solution? Well, it changed Japanese history forever.
I mean, just think about the sheer scale of that achievement for a second. It is staggering. This isn't just some dusty old history lesson. This is an epic. One guy, one pivotal battle, and the result is generations of stability. A period that would literally become known as the Great Tokugawa Peace.
But look, to really understand the man and what he accomplished, you first have to understand the world that made him. And that world was, well, it was pure chaos.
This was the Sengoku period, which literally translates to the Warring States. For over 100 years, Japan wasn't a single unified country, not even close. It was this violent, shattered chessboard where powerful feudal lords, the daimyo, were in a constant, bloody struggle for more land and more power. This is the world that Ieyasu was born into.
So, who was this man who would rise up from all that chaos? Well, his story doesn't start on a throne. It starts in a gilded cage. Ieyasu's life didn't begin with power. It began with him being used as a political pawn. Can you imagine? At just 6 years old, he was shipped off as a hostage. But what could have easily broken him? Instead, it forged him. Those years in captivity taught him incredible patience, resilience, and the fine art of political maneuvering. Once he finally got his freedom, he made a game-changing alliance with the warlord Oda Nobunaga, and that's when he began his slow, patient, and incredibly calculated climb to the very top.
So you have decades of patience, of brilliant strategy, and just plain survival. And it would all come down to a single day. A single day that would decide the fate of the entire nation.
All right, so by the late 1590s, Japan had a sort of unofficial leader, a guy named Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The problem was, when he died, he left a really young son as his heir. And that created a massive power vacuum. The government he set up to rule in his son's place just fell apart. And pretty soon, all the most ambitious lords in the country started making their moves.
So, the country basically split right down the middle. In the east, you had Tokugawa Ieyasu, who had become the most powerful man standing. And in the west, you had a whole coalition of lords who were still loyal to Hideyoshi's young son. The stage was set for this massive, winner-take-all showdown at a place called Sekigahara.
Just try to get your head around the scale of this thing. We're talking about over 160,000 warriors, all converging on one battlefield. This wasn't some minor skirmish. This was one of the biggest and most important battles in the entire history of Japan. Everything was on the line.
And in the end, Ieyasu won. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about brute force. His victory was a total masterpiece of strategy. It was built on this cunning diplomacy he'd been doing for months before the first sword was even drawn. And then, during the battle itself, key enemy commanders suddenly switched sides, defecting to his army. It completely shattered the Western army and handed him total, absolute victory.
Okay, so winning the battle was one thing. A huge thing, for sure. But now came the really hard part. How do you turn that military victory into a peace that's actually going to last for centuries? This, right here, is where Ieyasu's true genius comes into play. So in 1603, the emperor made it official. He appointed Ieyasu as shogun, the supreme military dictator of all Japan. This was the beginning of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Ieyasu then moved the capital to his own power base in Edo, which you might know better as modern-day Tokyo, and he started building a whole new political system from the ground up.
So, to make sure none of the other powerful lords could ever challenge him, Ieyasu put a strict set of rules in place. The daimyo were now only allowed to have one castle each. That's a big deal, because it stops them from building up regional power bases. They couldn't build new fortresses or even arrange marriages for their kids without getting the shogun's permission first. Every single thing that could possibly lead to a rebellion was systematically shut down.
But his most brilliant move, his absolute masterstroke, was a policy called Sankin Kotai, or alternate attendance. On the surface, it sounds kind of simple, but it was just devastatingly effective at keeping everyone in line.
Okay, so here's how this incredibly clever system worked. Every single daimyo had to spend every other year living in the capital, Edo. This did two things. First, the cost of keeping up a fancy second home and traveling back and forth with this huge entourage was financially crippling. It basically drained their bank accounts so they'd have no money left to raise an army. And second, and this is the most important part, their wives and children had to live in Edo permanently. They were, for all intents and purposes, very high-status hostages. No lord in his right mind would dare rebel when his family was living under the shogun's nose.
Ieyasu also completely reorganized the social ladder. He basically sorted all the daimyo into different classes based on how loyal they were to him. At the top, you had the shinpan. These were his own relatives. Then came the fudai, his most trusted allies who had backed him before his big victory. And then at the bottom were the tozama, the outsiders. These were the guys who fought against him or only joined him after he'd already won. This system brilliantly rewarded loyalty while sticking any potential threats way out in remote parts of the country where they couldn't cause any trouble.
So, after all of this masterful political engineering, what was the result? Well, it was a period of stability so long and so profound that it was named after the family that made it happen.
The result was more than 2.5 centuries of uninterrupted peace. Think about that. After 100 years of constant, brutal warfare, this Pax Tokugawa, the Tokugawa peace, was an almost unimaginable achievement. The system that Ieyasu built was so strong, so robust, that it brought Japan an era of stability and prosperity unlike anything it had ever seen before.
And you know what happens when a society stops worrying about war all the time? Culture just explodes. This period gave us the incredible drama of kabuki theater, those iconic ukiyo-e woodblock prints you've definitely seen, and the beautifully refined poetry of haiku. Cities like Edo grew into some of the biggest in the entire world, all powered by this new, thriving merchant class. It was a golden age, all made possible by peace.
When you get right down to it, the story of Tokugawa Ieyasu is so much more than just a history of battles and laws. It's a really powerful reminder of how one person's incredible, long-term vision, a vision forged in total chaos, can lay a foundation for peace so strong that it literally shapes a nation's identity for centuries to come.